my definition for being a woman, that's the great creative potential of the world. It's a gift. There is a strength in a woman that nobody can explain. You have 1,000 uses. You can resist. Woman is always afraid and suspicious. And every time I come out of home, I have to think, should I take this way? It's dark. I am afraid of being assaulted and raped, maybe. The greatest security I had is to put people within the vehicle. And to combat that, it's no good just having one initiative or two initiatives, short-term initiatives. No, we have to look at mid-term initiatives. Last year, we invested 3 million, 5 million in 3 years, and we followed that. In a partnership with Uber, we developed a training for the police people in the assistance of women in the situation of violence. The security button is very important because you're sharing that route, and if you're stopped too long in that place, somebody might be paying attention to you, and with a simple touch we can activate the police. So technology and the capillarity of Uber is a very good partnership, where through WhatsApp we created a way where the domestic violence women can, or victims of domestic violence, can activate and help and ask for help. It is important for companies to have initiatives to help women to feel secure and protected. And that work together with all will be everything that's being done with a bigger scale, in a bigger scale. So Uber is giving us something that we can put to the future as a positive legacy for the next generations that will face part of the challenges that we only part of the challenges that we have to face today. And this is very gratifying. That's the way I define it, to be a woman. They, we, they, we, stop killing us. They. If instead of walls, what if we built ourselves? We, us, or we. Stop killing us, we. Brazilian Forum of Public Security. 14th floor, from 7th to 11th of December. Hello, good afternoon to all ladies and gentlemen. Now we're beginning the discussion on facial recognition and public security of the 14th Forum for Public Security. I'm Pablo Nunes. I'll be coordinating the works during this talk, and I am graduated in political sciences. I have a doctor's degree in political sciences, and since 7 years I've worked in research in this Center of Public Security of Cândido Mendes University, and I'm the coordinator of that center, and I'm associated to the forum. It was very gratifying to know that the forum would take place with a discussion on technologies for facial recognition as applied to police work. What we have seen in the scenario in other countries around the world is that technology is already being applied since a long time ago, and there is a lot of debates on how to apply these technologies, several studies about impact evaluation, about the efficiency also about these technologies. And in Brazil, we're only beginning to take the first steps in relation to the implementation of projects in different police organs in the states of Brazil. And we want to make the public debate on the uses and the possible risks and limitations in the use of these technologies. Since last year, SESEC has a opinion on these technologies being used in Brazil, as they are being used in Brazil. We inaugurated a panoptic, a monitor for facial recognition in Brazil, which will somehow contribute for the public debate, doing exactly the analysis of some of these projects that are being implemented all around Brazil. I'm very satisfied that the Fórum has been giving importance to this debate, and let's hope that it'll be a reason to have many other debates from now on at a public space. Now, to talk about facial recognition and their applications and their risks, we have 4 invited speakers, which is very good. We are very thankful for them to be able to be here with us today. The first invited speaker today is Susanna, who is part of the General Direction of Internal Affairs for Integration in the European Commission, Susanna Jansen. And we'll hear the experience of Alexandre Leite Alves, a colonel from the military police who was fronting facial recognition projects here in Rio de Janeiro. And then we will also hear the analysis by Patrick Doyle, who is an ex-commander of the New Jersey Police in the United States. And we will also have the presence of Nina da Hora, who is a computer scientist by the PUC of Rio de Janeiro University, and also a columnist at MIT Tech in Brazil. We'll explain the dynamics. We'll have a first round of presentations of each one of the 4 invited speakers, around 10 minutes, and then we will have 2 rounds of questions and answers to be answered, and final considerations. If you wish, please send us your questions. We're paying attention to the chat, and any questions that arrive to us, we will address to our invited speakers. Hello, I'm here much more to hear than speak, so I invite Susanna Jansen to present her views on the use of facial recognition. Thank you, Susanna.
Thank you, Pablo. Dear audience, dear distinguished speakers, I'm very of the planet, from Europe, from Brussels, and to share with you all thoughts at the European Commission about facial recognition. I'm working now for 10 years in the Directorate General of Home Affairs, and I was also working on biometric systems in the last years. I'm also glad to be the first speaker because then I can a bit set with speakers, the practitioners, they will bring also their practical examples. So first of all, when we are discussing facial recognition, it's very important actually to clarify the definitions and exactly what we are talking about. Because facial recognition covers many different technologies, it covers many different use cases, and actually it is in the public speaking, it is always associated to mass surveillance, and it's also associated to artificial intelligence technologies. So I think first of all, it is time to clean up and to clearly define actually what is facial recognition and what does it have to do with mass surveillance, whether it's a false link or a real link, and what is the connection with artificial intelligence technologies. Since this technology, facial recognition, is a lot older than artificial intelligence, it is going back already in the 60s, and actually the first database with facial images was created in 1993 already, so we are not talking about a new technology. It was created in the US by DARPA, and then the first standards were developed for these images in 2004 by the National Institute of Technology, the NIST, in the US. facial recognition covers actually many different use cases, and it is equally used by public authorities in certain situations and also by private parties. So when we are talking about regulation and debate, we clearly have to distinguish the users and the objectives. Of course, facial recognition is also always linked now to artificial intelligence, since we saw in many cases that this technology was actually very much reinforced by artificial intelligence, and it allowed the screening of a large amount of pictures, facial images of persons very quickly on a very high quality and actually with a very high accuracy. So NIST also has proven that if artificial intelligence technology is used for facial recognition, the accuracy is 200, 300 times higher than if the same facial recognition is used by another technology. But like every technology, facial recognition also requires responsibility, since it can be misused by private and public parties as well. Therefore, it has to be also clearly regulated. But the regulation must depend always on the concrete use. So let's just go through quickly what are the different types of uses. First is the so-called verification, the verification of the identity. It means that we would like to see whether a person is the lawful holder of a certain piece of document, for example. It is the most typical use case is the electronic gates at airports. There are in the European Union, there are already over 500 such electronic gates, but that is, let's say, a public use to see if the person is the lawful holder of the document, but it can be also used in private context to get into a certain building, for example. The verification normally doesn't raise many privacy concerns, since the data, data of the comparison is not retained. Yeah? Then the other use case, which is actually one of the most significant in the security context, that is the so-called facial identification. It means that the image of the person is compared to a reference database. This reference database, it can be a security type of database, it can be a population database, but it can be any sort of database also put up by a private party. We can think about private users, for example, that we had in Europe, that in certain schools wanted to check the presence of the pupils, and that's why they established facial recognition at the school gates to see whether a pupil arrives. So they use as a reference database the facial images of the kids who are attending this school, but the same can be also imagined if people are attending a concert, a great event, then they don't have to use any tickets anymore, but they can go to this event just by using their facial images. Of course, in the police, there are many different use cases for this type of identification. The most typical one is the identification of perpetrators, used by video footages on CCTV cameras. So there was a certain crime, and then afterwards the police tries to reconstruct the events and also figure out the identity of the perpetrators. So they are taking these images, extracting the facial image from the video footage, and they are comparing it with a reference database of wanted persons, people who are thought for an arrest warrant, for example. But identification also can be used with the same type of methodology to find missing persons, also, or to detect terrorists. So it is also, or if police officers, they are wearing a body cam, then, and this body cam is also recording what is happening in a police intervention. Afterwards, it can be then reconstructed who participated in this event. But what is also an extremely important use case of this identification is victim identification. For example, the victim of child sexual abuse materials or the victims of trafficking of human beings. So that is a very important investigative tool. And then the third use case of facial recognition is the sort of categorization according to gender, according to age, maybe according to racial origin. And what is also important and which links this technology to surveillance is the recognition of emotions on the face. And basically that's where not just the identity of the person can be seen on the basis of his face, but also maybe even his thoughts, because his emotions or even his body temperature. So, and then in that sense, yes, it can be even this technology used for surveillance. But what differentiates actually mass surveillance and remote facial recognition in public spaces? I think it's a very important differentiation. Mass surveillance, it means that all of the persons who are in public spaces, they are captured by cameras, their facial images, and it is compared to a database which can be the population database, so the most generic administrative database. And also the image of the comparison is not afterwards not destroyed, but it is retained. So it means that every person can be followed up and their movements can be exactly detected, and even maybe even their emotions. So that is mass surveillance, when without any limitation, in an indiscriminate way, everybody's pictures are captured. In comparison, facial recognition, remote biometric identification in public spaces for security purposes, it means that there is always a concrete security ground, and there is always a concrete security database to screen in a geographic area, in a well-defined geographic area, the persons who are passing by. And in that sense, the reference database is extremely important. This database can be the database of terrorists, wanted terrorists, persons who are sought by a warrant for arrest, but it can be, according to definition, maybe convicts or even missing persons. So in that sense, it's very important that the geographical area is limited and the reference database, so the objective is very clear: who is sought, who is wanted in this in the mass of people, whether they are terrorists or wanted criminals, for example. So and then it is also important to determine the duration when the cameras are working and when this facial recognition is in use. So actually, to have a meaningful debate about facial recognition, about intrusiveness, proportionality, we all have to define what is exactly the objective of the system, how it is used, and what is the reference database. It is very important, and we also have to see whether there are alternative means to facial recognition, so whether facial recognition is proportionate, whether the storage, so the data used for comparison in the database, whether this data is retained or it is not retained after the comparison, if there is no any sort of match. And then whether there are any alternative means instead of facial recognition. In principle, in the EU, the use of the processing of biometric data is prohibited, except if there are compulsory reason of security to use it in a proportionate manner, subject to very strict safeguards. And when police authorities are deploying such systems, actually there must be a public consultation, a public debate about it. And also there is data protection authorization process, including a data protection impact assessment. Because, of course, facial recognition identification in public spaces, it can be argued that it has chilling effect on democratic rights, and that's why it's important to see but actually how this societal impact, how the democratic impact, how strong it is actually, and how it is affected. So this would be my first thoughts to facial recognition. Finally, just to wrap it up, of course, verifications, the first use, it is widely used in airport. The identification for investigation purposes to find perpetrators in victims, it is also widely used by the police forces. The remote biometric identification in public spaces, so which is wrongly associated to surveillance or even to mass surveillance, it has extremely limited use. There were 2 or 3 member states where there were trials. But finally, because it requires a concrete legal authorization, and as I said, data protection impact assessment, actually there was no legislation passed on the use of these police tools, because it requires public consent and the broad public debate. And we are still in the EU, we are still continuing this public debate. Thank you very much.
Facial e as suas aplicações. Muito obrigado.
Obrigado, Suzana. Obrigado, Suzana. Eu vou passar logo para o Alexandre Leite Alves, que é tenente-coronel da Polícia Militar do Rio de Janeiro. Lembrando que essa primeira rodada a gente está destinando 10 minutos para cada apresentação, e eu estou avisando no chat quantos minutos faltam para os 10 minutos primeiros, porque a gente ainda vai ter muito debate nas outras rodadas. Então, por favor, tenente-coronel, fique à vontade para fazer a sua apresentação.
Obrigado, Pablo. Tá conseguindo me ouvir bem? Tá? Ok. Bom, eu sou subcoordenador, coordenador adjunto, né, da Coordenadoria de Assuntos Estratégicos da Secretaria de Estado de Polícia Militar do Rio de Janeiro, né, e trabalho aqui já há quase 29 anos na Polícia Militar, e, enfim, acho que a gente já ganhou bastante experiência no trabalho policial. Minha formação é na área de tecnologia da informação, sendo o último curso que eu fiz foi um MBA de gestão estratégica de TI, né? E participei de alguns projetos na área de vídeo monitoramento, né? Vídeo monitoramento com as câmeras fixas espalhadas pela cidade. Participei do projeto para a implantação disso lá atrás, em 2006, 2007. Depois, em 2008, também começamos a desenhar a inclusão do vídeo monitoramento nas viaturas. E isso foi depois veio se tornar realidade somente em 2011, né? Quando a gente apresentou o termo de referência para a aquisição das câmeras no interior das viaturas. Isso foi até um projeto bastante interessante. Lógico que veio em decorrência também da própria demanda legislativa, né? E aí a gente conseguiu implementar isso, fazer funcionar dentro das câmeras e ter até possibilidade de conexão de streaming de vídeo para a gente poder visualizar o que acontecia dentro e fora das viaturas da polícia, assim como a gente vê em outros países, né? Hoje, a gente está trabalhando projetos para a utilização de câmeras corporais, inclusive com a possibilidade de ter reconhecimento facial. Trabalhei ano passado fazendo um teste, um primeiro contato que a gente teve com o reconhecimento facial, foi ano passado, um teste que foi feito em 2 momentos. O primeiro momento foi em fevereiro, durante o Carnaval. A gente fez um acordo de cooperação técnica com a Oi, que foi a empresa que apresentou interesse em fazer a apresentação e a demonstração do equipamento, né? E nós fizemos esse acordo. Foi feita a instalação por conta da Oi, sem nenhum ônus para a polícia, a instalação de 34 câmeras espalhadas no bairro de Copacabana, para que fosse feita essa primeira interação da polícia com essa tecnologia, né? Assim, as vantagens dessa tecnologia, eu não vou entrar no mérito aqui para discutir, até porque eu acho que vou deixar isso para os debatedores ao longo do tempo, né? A gente vai, na verdade, vamos fazer uma construção, né? A verdade é essa, aqui do que a gente entende ser vantagem e do que é desvantagem, tá? Eu visualizo vantagens e visualizo também desvantagens. Algumas corroboram com os senhores. E então, o que acontece? A gente fez esse teste. Num primeiro momento, tivemos uma demanda muito grande e a gente teve que adaptar nosso atendimento para aqueles acionamentos, né? E estabelecemos alguns protocolos de ação, porque essas imagens chegavam até o nosso centro de monitoramento, né? E a gente dali despachava uma viatura para fazer a abordagem da pessoa que tinha sido detectada nas câmeras. Bom, de modo geral, né, foi bastante interessante a nossa experiência, né? Tivemos, naquele primeiro momento, 8 ocorrências em que 5 pessoas foram detidas porque tinham mandado de prisão e outros 3 veículos foram recuperados, veículos preventivos. No segundo momento, já em julho, e se estendeu até outubro, a gente fez uma expansão da utilização desse sistema. A ideia seria incluir outras funcionalidades, como cerca eletrônica, a possibilidade de a gente utilizar câmeras móveis, né? Então, assim, a ideia seria ampliar, e também locais. A gente colocou no Maracanã, próximo também do aeroporto Santos Dumont, e outras câmeras em Copacabana. Totalizou 95 câmeras, né? E nós tivemos 63 ocorrências em que as pessoas ficaram detidas porque havia um mandado de prisão contra elas. Claro que tivemos ocorrências que vale destacar, né? Até uma que aconteceu no dia 9 de julho de 2019, uma pessoa que foi abordada e ela não tinha identificação. Como ela não podia se identificar, eu não tinha como provar para os policiais que ela não era a pessoa que tinha sido detectada.
We couldn't assert that that person was the one that her face said he or she was. Well, but the database is not synchronized with the database of the National Documentation Database. So the person who was being detected in the camera was already in jail. So she shouldn't even be in the database.
A foto daquela pessoa presa.
So we couldn't have mistaken that person who was in jail with that identity from the camera. So in the first moment, there was a false positive, and there was a problem in the database that raised an alert signal, and we had to make several other reunions with the company and those who were making that database also. And just to remind you, this test was made only with warrant for prison. And so it was not just, it's you and let's go to jail. No. We had biometric data, we had comparisons, physical comparisons. And we had the adhesion, we had the use for disappearing or missing people also. It's one of the uses of to find missing persons also. And we have many of these cases. Now, in this general scenario, we picked up all the lessons that we learned. I think it was interesting to have this discussion because it really needs to be taken ahead. It has to mature. Now we are under the law of keeping the data, the private data of people. Now, facial recognition and the use of the monitoring has to have a regulation. We have to have a legislation so that something, anything, does not, or nothing goes beyond the authorities for this. There is a private company using virtual porters. A person presses the button, rings the button to get into the company, and if it is identified as a dweller in that building or a worker in that building, it lets this person in. But that situation, regardless of whether it's someone delivering a pizza, can't come in. Is it a valid thing? Can it be institutionalized? Can it be authorized? This is a discussion that we have to discuss some more about. Thank you very much, Lieutenant Colonel Leite. I think the Rio experience has a lot to go.
Experience of Rio had a lot to add to us. It's very important, your speech, and to elaborate a little with us. Your reflections are very important. I have just received, we'll have to change the order, and we will hear Nina Daora, who will speak about her vision. She's been working on those algorithms, and let's hear what she has to say about this issue and what the important is and how she has seen the debate on these technologies in Brazil. Nina, please, 10 minutes. Thank you, Pablo. Good afternoon.
Estou aqui do Rio de Janeiro mesmo, como já foi falado. Eu preciso explicar que o da hora é sobrenome, tá?
I work with media, and sorry, we have a thunderstorm here. The initial words, I want to say how I started with studying at information technology. I work with algorithms, but I have a concern because people who were around me didn't understand what I was studying and researching. So in Brazil, we are going through a difficult time, as the world is, but we are understanding what the importance is of other areas when it comes to information technology. And this reflected in my work, because besides researching algorithms and working in the academic world, I have a project for people, be it poor people who live in favelas, or be it students or the middle class, so that they can understand the importance of our technology in everyday life. So the technology, all in all, has positive impacts in society. We are getting closer to intelligent cities and the implementation of technology overall. And I want to clear out this for the people. This is part of my work. On the other hand, I can visualize that although we are working with technology that seems to be very recent, the first database we collected a few years ago, I think that the plurality of people who are working in the construction on facial recognition make it possible to lead with the negative impacts of this technology. What I want to say with this? Well, one of my research has to do with the ethic of the use of algorithms regarding facial recognition. And a week ago, there was a list of women in the world, and I was one of the Brazilian women that represented the country in a group of women discussing the ethics of the use of technology. And talking to women of different places, be it United States, Colombia, Spain, etc., or Latin America, what we thought that we had to build was a more accessible more accessible entrance of people into technology. People who have to do with design, with architecture, can purposely use technology. And I'm talking about these areas because it's the areas that have to do with the legislative world, with regulation, and also with processes. And we need to lead with this in our everyday life. So my job, besides what I've just said, and talking a bit more technically, I have researched systems which are open, which have to do with facial recognition, for us to understand what are the mistakes that these algorithms make when they are in practice. And some aspects are positive and some others aren't. I used to work with IBM and Gabriela Queiroz, who is Brazilian, who works in IBM in California. And this tool, which is open, and this colleague of mine did some research on it. This tool helps us to understand when we have a database, which are the biases that this database already have. So we worked with a database on healthcare in Germany, which is open. And one of the mitigations that we could do with that tool was to understand that they were having some biases. That database that they had and the information they had on people, younger people wouldn't be considered regarding chronic diseases, for example. So we identified through this company that bias, and we resolved it very quickly. So open tools from the point of view of the researcher working with algorithms will help us to build together the best idea of regarding regulation or legislation, because we have different legislation for Brazilians and other countries, but we have to map all the problems that take place and making a list with those problems, which are the most recurrent, so to take measures in that sense to solve these issues. So this is what I've been doing for you to explain this in a popular way, so that I now want to share the importance of using open tools, which are being built by researchers around the world who have a commitment to help in this cause of regulation for the benefit of society. Thank you. Thank you, Nina. I think that there is a lot to do in this task. And it's very interesting what you said to understand this technology that you are working in. Now, Mr. Patrick Doyle has 10 minutes for his presentation. Ask him not to speak very fast if he can. Patrick, please.
I'm so excited by the topic, but I will try to slow down. I must say that I intended to begin with different material, but I wanted to take a moment to both agree and capitalize on my colleagues that have spoken already. Facial recognition is quite honestly the most powerful tool for public safety of our time. It trumps all others in terms of its ability and its ease of capturing data and its use. And all these things make it incredibly useful in protecting us. But it is not perfect. And it is never, as the Colonel said, probable cause to make an arrest. Only his officers can determine that and then refer their findings of both the facial recognition candidates, their own interrogation of a possible suspect and other evidence they find onto a prosecutor, and then onto a judge, and then all matters being considered before conviction and facial recognition is but just a clue, an incredibly powerful clue and an efficient way for the colonel's officers and officers of other elements of Brazilian and other law enforcement entities to cull through thousands, millions of candidates, as Susanna said. But no matter how good Nina and her colleagues, and they are good, and these algorithms are getting so exact, they will have error rates that are, I don't know, Nina, perhaps 1/10 of 1%. They're not there yet. It will never replace the human being making the decision. So facial recognition has a place in our societies, but it is not the judge and jury. It isn't even the person to put the handcuffs on, and never should be, in my estimation. So I just wanted to start with that thought, that everything everyone else said points to the fact that you need good policy, good deliberation, and visibility so that the public knows what you're doing. And ultimately, when all things point, not just facial recognition returns, but all things point to the person likely being guilty of a crime or needing to be detained by the police, only then is that massive power executed by authorities. To do anything else would cause facial recognition to be the most hurtful rather than the most powerful tool that we have. And Pablo, if you don't mind, can I share a few slides? I just wanted to share a few things, if you don't mind. Can you see that screen? Can anyone see that? Susanna or anyone?
Sim, estamos vendo, Pedro.
Oh, you can see it. Okay, thank you. So in order for us to consider use of facial recognition, as Susanna said, we must first determine how it will be used, because this is the most difficult thing for the public to understand. The use cases, the way in which you will use it and already do in the Colonel's example or pilot program, is incredibly important, so that the public has an understanding that it's not magic, and nor will it be used unless needed for mass surveillance or for purposes of defending the homeland, for military or counterterrorism uses. But the civilian police uses should be well known to people. When we tell people about the way we use it, it helps to personalize it, because facial recognition is an image of our face. So it's very personal, and the public wants to understand that. It also can correct the things we see in television and movies, where it's so automatic, it hardly needs any guidance. And use cases can also help us create that publicly transparency and their comfort in the police. It also helps us develop good policies, which is very important. Behind my words is the headsets for iPhone or some device. Seems so simple, those darn things, but they're often hard to get untangled. So I wanted to use that as an example of facial recognition. When you can untangle that headset, it's very easy, but when you roll it in a ball and put it in your pocket, it sometimes confounds you. How do I get it untangled? So it's rather complicated yet simple at the same time, facial recognition. When Susanna said that facial recognition followed a certain policy, these are just some of the questions each time it's used that a police officer or examiner must either answer or have been answered before they used it. How is the image gathered? Where will the image be used? What is it compared against? Is it accurate? Is it a bank picture, a picture from bank, or is it one taken in a police setting that's very clear and perfect? Each time it's used, this question must be answered for it to be accurate. I think Nina would agree. And then the uses of law enforcement are sometimes to find a needle in a haystack, or to try and identify one person who is mentally ill and can't identify themselves. So there's so many variables. There are in the world 19 or 20 ways in which the police use this, or not just the police, but any regulatory agency, including making a photo lineup of potential people that they can show to a victim. If a woman is assaulted and they believe that someone that looks like me did it, the police can use a facial recognition system to create a lineup of candidates so that the victim can look through them, as opposed to having to face her accuser. So it has very powerful use cases, but they are many, and so it is complicated. They generally fall into three categories, which is field use, the officers in the field in uniform, investigative use for detectives, and for other custodial or special uses. So it's quite complicated. But these use cases will help you provide clarity as you go forward, and they'll help give the public confidence in it. A few recommendations which we might end up with when we finish, and I hope you'll think about these as you present us with questions. The best thing that we've found in my studies is to fully inform the public. Again, perhaps not the military police in their counterterrorism efforts, but in their general civilian use of it to enforce laws. Very important that the public know. Like the woman in the picture, it can't just be everything. It must be framed, the use of facial recognition. It must have some confines to it. If it's successful, like the young girl in the picture who is saved from a predator, unfortunately, you must publicize that. Maybe not her picture, but you must talk about the success of facial recognition. Extremely important that that success stories be made public. I know it may not be the nature of the police to beat themselves or pat themselves on the back, but you must in order to instill confidence in facial recognition. And finally, you have to have policy and procedures in place even before you begin, before the pilot programs begin. You must have policies that are in place to guide officers. This is very powerful technology and certainly worth keeping. But the point I started with that my other colleagues made for me was, much like the officers here who are working, I think, a disturbance in the crowd in the Capitol, they must be the determiners, not the solution, not the software. I'm confident Nina's teams will get it to where it is so accurate. It's unbelievable, almost magical, but the officer must make the decision. No one else can make a decision, or a judge, I should say, or a prosecutor. So I think that is how facial recognition should be implemented anywhere, not just in Brazil, but in any place where civil police are the protectors of the society, not the rulers of it. And facial recognition can help protect the public greatly. So thank you, Pablo. Those are my opening comments. I appreciate it.
Muito obrigado, Patrick. Realmente, a sua apresentação foi muito interessante. Eu acho que, inclusive, uma das questões que mais chamou a atenção são as suas 4 recomendações, que parecem simples, né, mas são fundamentais para que a gente tenha aplicação desse tipo de tecnologia, que é tão poderosa, né, e pode, enfim, ter tantos efeitos, que é muito importante que a gente realmente faça com que o público saiba, né, que essa tecnologia está sendo utilizada e também levar ao público os resultados, né, de eficiência e eficácia no uso dessas tecnologias. Realmente gostei muito da sua apresentação. Vou passar agora para algumas perguntas que a gente, durante o chat aqui, que estão chegando algumas perguntas ao vivo, e aí a gente continua seguindo a ordem das apresentações. Então, primeiramente, para a Susana.
Susana, we want to know which is importance of making it clear for the how, where, and when these technologies are used. How did you elaborate on this in the European Union? Exactly what the limits are of the application of the technology, and if you could tell about the experience of the use of this technology to find missing people. So you've got the word and you've got 5 minutes to answer this question. Thank you.
Thank you, Pablo, and thank you for all of the speakers for the extremely interesting and insightful presentations. Basically, in the European Union, to process personal data and sensitive data like biometrics, there must be a concrete legal authorization to do that. It can be national legislation, but it can be also a European legislation. It's a bit complicated, the system. If we are talking about borders, the European Union has common external borders. Then the use of biometric information is laid down in European regulations, basically, and they are equally applicable in all of the member states. Now we have technologies, facial recognition technologies at the borders, but for the moment they are in use only for verification purposes. So it means that the holder of the travel documents or of the visa is the person presenting him or herself at the borders. There are more than 500 such electronic gates in operation, but this operation can be carried out in the booths. And in case there is a doubt about the identity of the person, then he will be taken to an in-depth check in the so-called second line check, where then with facial recognition technologies, they will compare to European databases. So that is the situation at the borders. What is happening within the countries, what police can do, it always subject of national legislation, which has to lay down the exact parameters where this such technology can be used, also the technology which is behind it, also the accuracy and the standards, it must be all regulated in national legislation. As I already mentioned to you, there are hardly any use or extremely limited use of facial recognition at public spaces, so live facial recognition, which could be relevant to find missing persons. Therefore, I cannot give you such use case how these persons were identified in Europe, because cameras for that purposes are not in operation. But in case they are finding a child and this child doesn't know her name and cannot identify himself, they have the possibilities at the police stations to identify, to compare him with the missing person database. And there were already examples for that. And of course, if there is the child alert system, so there is a hot pursuit of a missing children, then the pictures are taken everywhere, and of course there is an active investigation going on. But for victim identification, for the victims of child sexual abuse materials, it is used for investigative purposes, actually, to clarify those pictures which were taken about the same victims, and then to compare them to the missing person database or for other databases on abused children. But this is investigation, and this is not live facial recognition carried out by cameras in the street. Thank you.
Perfeito. Obrigado, Suzana. Vou passar, tem algumas perguntas para o Tenente Coronel Leite. Vou tentar resumir um pouco das perguntas. A primeira é sobre a base de dados, né? O senhor trouxe.
You said this question of the lack of synchronization, and the question is if there haven't been before an analysis to see exactly this or to see this issue regarding the database. There is another question on the question of, or the issue of regulation. What do you think about regulation? What do you know any initiative, legislative initiative in the Rio de Janeiro? I know that in the federal district, that is Brasileiro, we had some norms passed for public safety where facial recognition was included. Do you know of any debate which is taking place here in the state of Rio de Janeiro on that matter? And if you have this information, how was your experience regarding missing people. Have there been people who were found using this technology? What was the effect of the application in these cases of missing people? What was the result? Okay, Pablo, let's go by parts. First of all, the question of the database. We didn't have enough time to manage to do a diagnosis of the database before the implementation of the test. And as it was a test, we used the database we had available, and it does the search of people when somebody goes to a police station to do an investigation about the person. So we did that in 2 phases. The Secretary of the Civil Police used it, and also the TRAN, which is the traffic authority. When we had this problem that we detected something which was done not in an adequate way, so we asked the civil police to update that database, and they told us there was no synchronization in place, and the courts should be implied in this process. So the military police, the civil police, and the traffic authorities, called the TRAN in Brazil, should be included in this process, within an agreement of technical cooperation. So if we do acquire the system in the state of Rio de Janeiro, then we will include also justice in this discussion, as we will need to have a synchronization when we have a police research, or when we detain an individual, when we imprison an individual. We will have to have the coordination of these several entities and feedback from the different entities to immediately know on this individual, maybe to avoid taking him to a police station if this is not necessary, for example. The other question is that the legislative discussion, what happens? We defined, first of all, the first parameters of internal protocols. When we talked about tools, we have a powerful tool here, because it avoids that the police officer gets to approach people in any sort of way. So this is a great advantage in this case. The police officer, using this tool of facial recognition, he doesn't need to approach 50 people to discover a suspect that maybe committed a crime. But he will be told through the system which are the most probable suspects, so that he doesn't need to approach, and we go direct to the individual who might become a suspect. So what happens? This legislative construction in the state of Rio de Janeiro hasn't evolved so much. We have some initiatives. I don't remember the name of the state deputy, but he participated in the law school, and he proposed a proposal of use of cameras in particular use, to share the use of particular cameras. And here, the proposal was to rule
And the proposal would be to see how these cameras would be shared. So we had a legislation turned to the limits of police action in the use of the system. But I believe that there should be a legislation as to that regulation on the limits to private lives for companies, private companies, to be using this kind of technology. As Nina said very well, we are evolving a lot in that issue. And some time ago, I was studying a little more about these things, and I studied neural networks with our convolutional. And this is an area that has a lot to be studied about and to evolve also. So the technology and the level of learning in this technology evolves also. It depends on the amount of tests you've made with the database that you have to be able to get more accuracy. And I believe that nowadays we have a lot of things to develop, a lot to grow. We talked about free apps, for example. These tools are very interesting, and I believe that I have answered the questions, Paulo. If there are any more questions, you tell me. Perfect, Leite. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, they're not being an order for the presentations. I'll hand it over to Nina da Hora to see how she has gone through the debate on algorithms theory. That's the new frontier, which is towards which the theme is going. How can we make analysis, and how can we make evaluations as to the several ways these algorithms can go? Facial recognition is one of the ways to use algorithms. And how do you visualize this debate, whether you see it growing in Brazil, and what are the limits and reaches of this kind of auditorship on the use of algorithms? Very good question, Pablo. I'll be talking about the auditorship. If we build, we are to rethink, both private and public, we have to rethink the method we're using, or that we have been using up to now, to build these algorithms. As far as private is concerned, several of these algorithms are private. They're not open. Several algorithms have security protection, so that regardless of the circumstances, they cannot be shared. So for us to get to an auditorship, from my point of view, we have to tread the path on how we look at all these algorithms, and also what would be a minimum so that you can get to audit anything. And the minimum would be like getting to the limit. A limit would be getting to someone's life being threatened. What are the minimum variables for you to begin auditing? So when we talk about algorithms, when we talk about systems and algorithm systems, software systems, we have an internal debate among us as to what is open and what is not open, what can be opened and what cannot be opened, should remain closed. So it is a very complex thing to say that we are prepared for an auditing, because we haven't opened the debate as to what has and has not to be opened. From what moment onwards will I make an auditing in a company that deals with facial recognition? There are 200,000-300,000 persons in one company sometimes. But what are the arguments that I have to be an auditing on the algorithms of a company? So it's very complex when we choose technology, because in technology, we in IT, we've dealt a lot with free internet, free access internet. There are free softwares, open source softwares. That is something that we dwell in. So internet is no one's territory. And now we see, now technology is for free, all right, so it's open to everybody, but we have to close sectors of it. So we have to take like 2 steps back, in order to think of auditorship and or auditing. Another point you touched, which is what we're discussing here about privacy and protection of privacy. You have to think that when you implement facial recognition in the educational organ, say school, and when we talk about education, we're talking about public security, yes, but how will you deal with the data from students who have or do not have authorization from their parents to be surveyed, for example? And how do you put that online? And we make a transference, and that will be totally protected. No, you're putting the data into the hands of other people who perhaps do not have that authorization on the part of parents. So you see, nowadays we have this thinking that if it is an internet, I can use it any way I want to. But we forget small laws, but not small in their size, but laws that talk about how to use works and files that talk about academic works of people, for example. All right. The lieutenant may have better view than I. We have had several denunciations of verbal or non-verbal violence being or attacks in the network. So we are in a precious, difficult moment. It's a precious moment, in fact, because we may take 2 steps ahead and 2 steps behind, but we can never get to it. It's very tantalizing. We are having this debate here, whether we like it or not, with people in an open chat, right? But these are not people who work with us, people who do not work with us, but have the opportunity of knowing the other views that we have. Because what comes out in media nowadays is like something happened. The culprit is facial recognition. And those who don't know that, who are from the outside, they don't understand that and say, oh, facial recognition is negative. And bam. Right? So the examples that you brought is not very much divulged in internet, So when you talk about auditing in algorithms, there's a lot of people who think that the technology in itself is negative. And how do we show that it might be positive in several instances and necessary, in fact? So this debate is very interesting because we're like opening the non-technical aspects in an accessible way to many people. Thank you, Nina. Thank you. And I'll hand over to Patrick Doyle. There was a question in the chat for Patrick as to, with the use of facial recognition technology in New Jersey, there were judicial demands for saying that there was an invasion of privacy. And how do you see this movement in several cities banning facial recognition, such as Portland, Oregon? And how do you see this issue going on in the United States? Like people being prosecuted.
Yeah, thank you, Pablo. The issue of such varied regulation on facial recognition causes one element of society in the United States, its states, in Canada, its provinces, in Australia, its states, to have different rules to deal with technology and with privacy and civil rights. The federal governments of the nations I named, they have a baseline standards for privacy, and the states may never go below that, but they may enhance the rights that they think their citizens get. So the United States is not a good example of deploying a privacy policy on one technology. In theory, there being 18,000, that's not an error, 18,000 police agencies in the United States.
Agência de polícia. Postos de polícia, digamos. No, agência de polícia.
Only 300 of them in that state of Oregon you spoke of, and Portland, Oregon being only one city. They have a set of rules that apply to their citizens and their geography only. it's very difficult for there to be a congruent or continuous use of facial recognition across the large geography of the United States or Canada when one city says, we won't use it because we feel it has disparate impact. The neighboring state and their large city endorses it and greatly uses it. So we, in many ways, Brazil is so far ahead of us in that you haven't rolled out this technology in mass. You're going about it in a thoughtful and deliberative way. You're discussing it ahead of time because the technology was created, as Nina said, although scientists around the world quickly added to the debate. It was created in the United States and rushed into use, before which time we could have an agreement among all places on how it would be used. My hope would be that in Brazil or in other nations of the world, you would have either a national policy or at least one that is for an entire state or province. One city inside of a state is going to become an island. At least if an entire province has the same rule, at least we know there's a definable border around that. So the way in which this is being done in the United States is most unfortunate. There are some other nations that are doing that, allowing local definition of rules, but it's going to be difficult. It already is, in that the city of Portland you spoke of does not share its photographic database with the neighboring city. In fact, with the state in which that neighboring city resides. It's going to be difficult. It continues to be a challenge on a daily basis. In some cases, criminals go unapprehended because that city would not cooperate with, let's say, the colonel's men or officers from the state police or the federal police. They don't get cooperation from Portland, and that bad person hides in Portland knowing that their photograph or their image cannot be captured or used. So it's not playing out well here, although the media has, I think, led the world to believe that most entities are not supportive of facial recognition technology. Not the case in the United States. Most are supportive with the policy that we talked about, the proper deliberation, the betterment of the algorithm. So there are some places that aren't. Will there be more? Yes, I think there will be, but the lion's share of them will use facial recognition and allow their databases to be used, provided there's a understanding as to how they will be used. So common understanding will prevail. Some of those entities will be outside of the protective layer that that law enforcement can give to us with facial recognition. And that's unfortunate. I hope that Brazil and other places learn from our mistakes. In a way, you're in a better position for not having rushed to it. You can roll it out in a more deliberative way, and that will help it to be all that it can be, because its power is in that it's collective, not that one city has it and one doesn't. Center City has it and the rural police don't have it. It's not as effective because criminals don't stay inside the city. They go to other places to hide and perpetrate their crime. So a difficult situation in the United States, hoping other countries have a more even deployment of facial recognition.
Obrigado, Patrick. Gente, por conta da...
I don't think we have more time for a second round of questions and answers. So I will open a wrap-up phase, let's say, so that each of the presenters can say their final words, whatever you think it's reasonable to say. Susanna first.
Thank you very much, Pablo. I just would like to react to Patrick, because I think that was an extremely important sentence, what he said at last, to have common standards. In the EU, what we have seen that actually the public debate, or due to public debate, it was not possible to deploy live facial recognition systems. There were successful trials, but due to the resistance, the public resistance, finally they were not deployed. So we are also not that far, although the technology is there. And therefore, I think the positive narrative and the success stories, and to show the use, and also what Tencel has said, that you don't have to check 90 guys because the system actually will show you whom you have to check. So it means that it's positive for fundamental right, because the police officers won't harass a 90 other one, but they have a targeted search. So I think it is very important to conduct the debate that the public can understand that this system is a friend and this system is helping, and there are safeguards not to use it in a mass surveillance way, and really to decouple live facial recognition from mass surveillance. So this two type of use. Thank you very much.
Que assegure a legalidade e a segurança do público. Muito obrigado.
Obrigado, Suzana. Obrigado, Suzana. Eu passo agora ao Tenente Coronel Leite para suas considerações finais. 2 minutos.
Então, eu me coloco à disposição aqui na Polícia do Rio de Janeiro. A gente está discutindo e debatendo sobre esse assunto, né, mais profundamente. Só relatando para os senhores o porquê a necessidade da gente estar hoje trabalhando isso. Só para os senhores terem uma ideia, a gente tem no Brasil 371.892 mandados de prisão em aberto, né? As polícias não têm condição de estar hoje conseguindo botar todas as pessoas dentro do sistema penal. E aí, assim, há que se questionar, e muitas pessoas vão até se perguntar.
To question how many people are out there who should be imprisoned. This is another question that we could discuss at a different moment, but we don't have conditions to fulfill all these imprisonment orders, or to find people who are who are escaping the police force. So those 371,000, only in Rio de Janeiro, we have 49,000 imprisonment orders. So this is a great demand. It's much greater than the police forces or the number of police officers we have. So this technology can help the task of the police. The idea is that we have technological tools that used coherently and intelligently can help us to use such resources, such technology, to improve the quality of life of the people of the state, for example. Okay, Colonel Leite now, Nina Daura. Well, this debate is very important because of what we are explaining here, especially for the Brazilian public. We are keen to follow the next steps, in terms of how we will be able to implement this technology for the benefit of the public in general. It was a pleasure to divide this debate with you all. I got lots of information that are very important for myself, who is working with this technology. And I would say, as a last message, that for the general public, to not be afraid to the technological possibility that we're building. Don't be afraid of what we call digital citizenship, which the general public does not understand, because the technology is just a tool to help human beings, to help us. So it's a tool to help us, and not to repress us or to work against us. Of course, that we have to have people who have the vision. There might be people who have the intention of using the technology against the general welfare of the public, but we believe that this is not the case. In the right hands, the technology can be very helpful. Thank you very much. Have a good week. Thank you, Nina. Now, Patrick Doyle has the floor and a few minutes for his last words.
Thank you. And I wanted to talk about a minute what Nina said, that digital citizen concept. Most citizens of all countries in the world are fairly comfortable with facial recognition on Facebook, or the fact that they might walk through Rio de Janeiro airport and the commercial entities might see my face and recognize that I'm a frequent buyer at a store, and they might send me an ad to my phone. So when facial recognition provides them with a convenience, they're somewhat accepting of it. It's almost in wider spread use commercially and in the private sector and by citizens themselves than we in the government or the protectors, law enforcement, are using it. I think that, I don't speak for the colonel, but most police forces in the world, anybody who's of that protective layer, does not intend to use it in such a flippant way. We don't intend to just capture every face and ask every person if they've done anything wrong. We intend to use it to protect you. And you have to trust, I guess, in our custodianship that we will use it that way. But it's not going to be rolled out or used everywhere for everything. It's never going to become that. That's not what police work and protecting you is about. Much of it has to do with interacting you and having compassion and taking conditions into mind. So facial recognition shouldn't be as feared as the media would have you believe. It's powerful. It protects and saves, especially children worldwide every day, as Susanna said, every single day. It returns a child to their parent somewhere. So I believe the intention of the authorities is to roll it out in this respectful way, get the regulations in place, make sure you're okay with the privacy, and use it for good. But we already use it in a pretty substantial way. If you're a citizen of the world and you have one of these, which all of us do, you probably don't realize how prevalent it is now. We're not going to use it that way. We're going to use it for the good. So you should have great confidence in your authority figures in your government, I think. But always question them as well, right? Ask questions and attend seminars and transparency meetings where they talk about it. Give your feedback, but I think it will do much more good than it will ever hurt anyone. It's the greatest technology we have at our hands now. So, and thank you to all my colleagues as well, and to you, Pablo, in the audience. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Patrick. We are now finishing our event, and we have lots of questions. For many times, I was worried here in Brazil because this debate is not being spread with the participation. It's not the society is not participating. This should be an open debate in the use of this technology. So we are taking important steps to spread this discussion, and I'm very happy that this space exists to start discussing with the police forces and with the different entities the use of this technology, and I remain at your disposition. We have this project in Seseki, which is doing a follow-up of this project, because we need to understand what is going on so that we can decide on which the regulation will be, which will be the best application of this technology, and how this technology will be in which hands to be able to use it positively. All this board has the meaning of personal facilitation. In the Instagram, in the Forum of Public Safety, we will have an infographic and with all our discussions, which will be preserved. So thank you very much to Patrick Doyle, to Nina Daora, to Suzanne Jansen, and to Lieutenant Leice to have participated in this debate to improve our ideas about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was great. Thank you. I learned a lot.
Thank you all. Good to see you all.
Good to see you all. Bye.